Hey there, sports fans. Well, tonight we reach a big milestone in Glastonbury Romance. This is the big 4-0 today, the 40th edition of Glastonbury Romance. I've been with you 40 nights reading this stupid book. Well, let's continue with it today. As you look down upon the earth that clear March evening, and watch the chessboard's fields pass in procession beneath him, and watch the trees fall into strange patterns, and watch the village, some red, some brown, some gray, according as brick or stone or slate predominated, approach or recede, as the plain sank or arose, Philip's spirit felt as if it had wings of its own that were carrying it over this conquered land independent of Barter's piloting. They passed over Haviant, where the monks on one occasion persuaded the Danes to draw back and refrain from plundering the abbey. They passed over West Pennard, and over Pylay and Evercreech. They passed over Batcombe, and over Wanstraw, and over Pondlebury Wood. And it was not till they reached Marston Bigot, where they could see to the eastward in the livery waters of the Somersetshire Frome, that Barter swung the plane around and headed west again. Due west they fly now, over the stone roofs of Stephen Mallet, straight to the city of Wells. When they were above Wells, and they could look down on the cathedral directly beneath them, they turned northwest, and soon, without trouble or mishap, they descended on this precise place that they had aimed for, between Wookey Hole and Arbor Rocks. The impression which rioted in Philip's brain as he clambered out of his seat and stretched his legs upon solid earth in that darkening meadow, resembled the release of a charge of electricity. How small and unimportant Wells Cathedral had looked from up there in the air. It was of the planetary earth, a sensitized round orb circling through space, not of any calm earth mother lying back upon her secret life, that his mind was full. It had all passed only too quickly. It seemed only just a minute ago that he had scrambled into his seat on the back of this shining torpedo with dragonfly wings. But what thoughts, what sensations! His brain whirled with the vision of an earth life dominated absolutely by science, of a human race that had shaken off its fearful childhood and looked at things with a clear, unfilmed, unperverted eye. He said to himself as he walked out of the field from Barter, for they were intending to stay the night at Wookey Hole, that this conquest of air had reduced those Glastonbury ruins to nothing. And now utterly unimportant and irrelevant all this disputing about capital and labor and private property. Science must soon, he thought, give into the hands of every individual so much power of creation, power of destruction, that this dogmatic doctrine about common ownership will cease to have any meaning. "Don't wait for supper for me," he said to his companion as they closed the gate leading into the highway. He and Barter had their own particular bedrooms in a little wayside inn called the Zoyland Arms, close to the entrance to Wookey Hole Cave. The factory there had no accommodation for travelers, for though its wheels were turned by the river axe as it emerged from its underground caverns, it was not much more than a series of large workshops. The working people came on foot or by lorry from the Wells suburbs, which were only a couple of miles away from people who wished to remain overnight or at the mercy of the landlord of the inn. The two men were expected that evening to supper, and Will Zoyland was already seated at the parlor table with an uncorked bottle of wine at his side, enjoying his soup, when they entered the place. Philip was still in an unusual state of excitement as he ran upstairs to his little room, where the gas had already been lit. His window looked out onto the white road, and opposite it, the darkening hedge there was a small ash tree, whose black, sticky buds had already burst here and there into a blurred shape of embryo leaves, shadowy and indistinct against the livid western sky. Strange exultation still throbbed in his pulses as he found himself alone in the small chamber looking out on the silent road and on the tree. He felt in no hurry to join the others. Let Zoyland entertain Barter as he pleased till he chose to go down. He was their employer. He would dine when he felt inclined. He pushed his way past the heavy, cheap dressing table with its great, ugly-looking glass and jerked aside the sham-laced curtains that obstructed his view. He made an effort to open the window at the top. In the flare of the gas lamp suspended from the ceiling, he saw a couple of dead flies on the narrow ledge where the window latch was. Something about these flies, combined with the lace curtains, and with the fact that he had found difficulty in opening the window, brought his spirits down to earth. When he did jerk the window open, one of the dead flies followed it, but the other one remained upside down, its legs stiff, its small cuirassed head inert, its body drained of its all life juices, husk-like and hollow. He flicked the dead fly with his fingernail out the window, and resting his elbow on the woodwork, leaned far out. A faint odor of funguses came to him, mingled with the peculiar smell of road rust dust that bears upon it the first weight of the falling night. A rustling sound followed by a series of sleepy, peevish clucks, and then by more rustling indicated the presence of roosting fowls. The little ash tree against the dying fragments of steely whiteness in the sky stretched out its branches. Stretched them out with the particular upward clutch of the twig ends that characterizes its tribe. Philip's face at this moment would have presented a mask of stony human fanaticism to the senses of that little tree if they could have pierced the dark. From this air flight, one of the first he had ever taken, he had gathered a momentum that no dead fly, however discouraging, could retard. He used it now to shoot his mind like a rock-shattering projectile into those remote caves of Wookiee Hole out of which rolled the subterranean river that turned the wheels of his factory. A grim smile crossed his mouth when he recalled how contemptible, how unimportant, the massed towers and buttresses of Wells Cathedral had appeared as he flew above them. His thoughts clanked harshly along the up-curving branches in front of him, like a proud brigade of arrogant tin soldiers. A cold fury of destruction possessed him when he thought of Glastonbury. Arthur and the Holy Grail Abbey ruins, and St. Joseph, he was the man to blow them all sky-high. Communism? Nah, a thing of mere distribution of spoils. What did a meticulous economy of that kind matter? On, destroying the past, creating the future. On! The hard light of his electric bulbs and the stalactites of Wookiee Hall could not have glittered more fiercely. The steel surface of his new plane could not have shone more coldly than the narrowed eye slits of Philip Crowe as he drew his head back under the hanging gas globe and walked over to the wash basin. Damn! Another dead fly in his soap dish. He tossed out the soap and carried the dish to the window and shook it there with a vindictive sweep of his arm. He felt as if his glittering onrush through the world, engine after engine after engine, and himself yanking them forward with an iron heart, was outraged by the mere existence in the world of dead flies. That fellow John, damn him, was a dead fly come to life. Gerd was another. Those ridiculous Deckers were others too. Tilly, in his own house, with her black beady eyes, was yet another. All were buzzing flies, whose existence stung him in life and spirited him in death. What was that line in some old poem that he had had to learn by heart at school and that he had never forgotten? Heads without name, no more remembered than summer flies. Heads without name. His had a name, Devois. That was a name for a man to face life with. He hurriedly washed his hands and face, plastered down his iron-gray hair over his narrow skull, grinned like a wolf at himself in the ugly looking-glass, and ran downstairs. An unexpected shock was awaiting him as he entered the little parlor full of small supper tables. There were Zoylan and Barter laughing together, already warmed by Zoylan's wine. But there at another table, and they rose at once to greet him, were Dave and Percy Spear. They must have been agitated all day and collected names in the Wookiee Hole plant. But he could not restrain his pleasure in seeing them there. How perfect she looked in this dim parlor light. He thought Dave looked a trifle embarrassed, and no wonder, this revolutionary rogue, as they shook hands. But she was his. Her eyes told him she was his. He knew it in the marrow of his bones as she leant toward him giving him not only her ungloved hand, but everything. Yes, she was like that long swaying ash tree branch just budding in the night out there. He hurriedly crossed over to his own place, jested coldly about Zoylan having opened the bottle, murmured something sarcastically to Barter about propagating his Bolshevitsky relatives, and carried his chair to Spears' table. "Have you brought your stiletto for the wicked capitalist?" cried Will Zoylan. "And what's that, Will?" threw in Dave. "I asked Percy if she got her dagger hidden away in her underlinen to give Crow his quietus," repeated Lord P's bastard, winking at Barter. Barter's face at the moment was indeed one in which could be read strange matters. The wine had heated him. Otherwise, he would have found the whole situation bristling with discomfort. His cautious upper-middle-class respectability had already been outraged to its foundation by Zoylan's noisy camaraderie. Zoylan and his brother-in-law's wife had by the time exchanged not a few strokes of reckless roguery. Barter's lecherousness had for years been roused to a fever of aggravation by Percy's spear. He had seen more of her in their Norfolk childhood than he had seen of any of his cousins, and he had used her young figure on many a sex-starved occasion for the satisfaction of his amorous thoughts. But Percy had never let him touch her. She disliked him mentally, and she loathed him physically. But she was already enough to chafe him, and when she did this, she always bewildered him by her clever modernity. Barter had felt a horrible sense of social inferiority just now as he had sat sullenly drinking William Zoylan's wine. His family was in reality quite as good as that of the Crows, but he totally lacked the suppleness of the Crow's mind. He was in fact socially old-fashioned, and to be old-fashioned at this date meant being made a fool of by clever women. It was still more uncomfortable for him when Philip appeared and began his dinner at the Spears table. Zoylan had called for a second bottle and had begun to grow slightly tipsy, and with his tippiness extremely confidential. Even so, he didn't treat Barter, at least so Barter thought, like a real equal. He confided in him blindly, grossly, callously, a good deal as a gentleman would confide in a faithful servant of whose discretion he was sure, but towards whose personal reactions to what he confessed he felt completely indifferent. Tom Barter had not one single relative of any kind living. He had never been to the university. His diploma of social position went back to an earlier date, but he had been to Grayland School. He had entered an office at 19, and since then he had lived for two things, lechery and money. He had seen to it that these two things did not clash by habitually taking his pleasures cheaply. This he did by eschewing harlots and mistresses, and by enjoying constantly new adventures with flirtatious middle-class girls. With shopgirls, business girls, waitresses, barmaids, Barter always won favor, partly by reason of him being a gentleman, partly by his shameless advances, but most of all by a certain direct, unassumed, cynical but very honest interest in all their professional problems. They felt at home with him. They trusted him. And except for depriving them of pretension to purity, he really was to be trusted. And we'll leave it there for the night. On page 236. Well, if you enjoyed me, I hope you enjoyed that section with me, and thanks for coming to the 40th reunion of the first day of A Glastonbury Romance. So until next time, I'll see you in Glastonbury. Cheers.